Good morning. I finally got my edition of Lesbian Connection magazine. It always takes super long to get to me in Canada, so I'm always really late. And what also sucks is that by the time the edition gets here, the submission dates for the following edition that are printed in this edition have come and gone already. So that sucks. But anyway, this edition is the January-February 2021 issue, volume 43, issue 4. It has the responses to the letter by Anne McKinney, who was totally abhorred by the transphobia in Lesbian Connection. I made a video about that. I will link it here in a card at the top of the screen. Anyway, now there's some responses printed. Some good, some really awful, but let's go through the responses because I did in my video encourage all of you to write into Lesbian Connection and let you know how you felt about this. So I'll go through the responses, the good and the bad. Editor's note. This is the third and most likely the last time that we'll be dealing with the subject covered in the following responses, at least for a while. I have seen them print that before, so we know it's not not too accurate. But anyway, this letter is from Chris Christoffel from Fayetteville, Arkansas. I think is the abbreviation for Arkansas AR. Anyway, she says, I so appreciated Anne McKinney's clear, well-reasoned response in the last issue to the lesbians who complain about how fewer young women are identifying as lesbians. Feminism values all people, wherever they are on the road to their own identity. We all get to name ourselves. Okay, so two big things here. First, we all get to name ourselves. I partially agree and partially don't agree. We all need to come to the conclusion of who we are and what we are, but that doesn't mean you can appropriate something and take it for yourself, right? Like, we all get to name ourselves, sure, but when a man names himself a lesbian, no, that's not accurate. And I guess he can call himself a lesbian, and many do, but that doesn't make him one, okay? So second part that I have an issue with is feminism values all people. I think that's not quite an accurate statement to make, or it's not portraying what feminism is correctly. I think many feminists value all human life, but feminism is not for all people. So the phrasing of that sentence kind of is not, it's not very well thought out. Moving on. Ooh, this is a long one. A letter from Linda Strega in Oakland, California. She wrote, I've been a subscriber since the early days, and I appreciate more than ever the rare space that LC provides for lesbians to connect with each other. In her response about identifying as lesbians, Anne McKinney wrote, when a friend of mine came out as a trans lesbian, I wanted to give her the gift of a subscription to LC, but decided that the anti-trans comments would be too harmful to her. I'm glad she didn't give LC to her friend. However, I wish it had been out of love and respect for other lesbians. I wish it had been to protect our privacy as we write about our tender coming out stories, our conflicts and heartbreaks, our injuries from oppression and our courage in resisting oppression, our grief and memorials for dead friends and lovers, our struggles and successes with the everyday problems of life. Anne wrote, take some time to learn more about what it means to be trans. Listen to trans people and their stories. Educate yourselves. Lesbian feminists have been forced to learn about trans ideology and behavior simply to survive the destruction of our communities. We've endured verbal and physical attacks, loss of jobs and friends, the erasure of lifetimes of political work, and grief about the devastation of young lesbians' lives by queer and trans propaganda. We're very well informed and have listened to their stories for years. We know that they demand the right to be called women, while we are reduced to being cisgender women or non-males. We know that mentioning menstruation or a uterus is transphobic because it makes them feel bad. We know that queer or trans ideology says that children who don't fit male-defined gender stereotypes are transgender and should get dangerous hormones and irreversible surgeries before puberty, instead of simply being accepted as they are. If feminism was not demonized and censored, young people could learn that not fitting stereotypes does not make them the opposite sex. Radical lesbian feminism is a grassroots liberation movement based on physical reality and observable social and political conditions. By contrast, queer and trans ideology is a backlash against feminism and is misogynist and homophobic. It came out of academia, has lots of class privilege, white male money behind it, and it generates big profits for the medical and psychiatric industries and big pharma. That's why its promoters have achieved so much social clout and political power in a very short time, while feminists have struggled for centuries with limited success that is now being quickly destroyed. Linda, oh my God, thank you for writing this. Linda is a co-author, I believe, of Dykes Loving Dykes, Suppress Politics for Lesbians. So to have her write into Lesbian Connection about this, that's pretty cool. I appreciate that. Okay. We've got another winner here. A letter from MPD from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. I have 2 words for Anne McKinney. Thank you. I have had the same feelings of discomfort and shock at the transphobic comments that have been uttered in LC, and I commend you for having the courage to speak up. To quote Audre Lorde, what is most important to me must be spoken, made verbal, and shared, even at the risk of having it bruised or misunderstood. I sincerely don't understand how people can allow themselves to utter transphobic comments. We all have internalized sexism, racism, homophobia, heterocentrism, and transphobia because of the society we live in. However, as individuals who have been or are still oppressed because of our gender and sexual orientation, it is our duty to become conscious of our internalized isms by educating ourselves, deconstructing social norms, and standing up as allies with others in our community. I recommend the book Microaggressions in Everyday Life, Race, Gender, and Sexual Orientation by Derald Wing Sue. I have faced repeated discrimination and bigotry for my sexual orientation by a member of my family, and this has been extremely difficult. It takes a toll. If folks had been discriminated against, I encourage you to get in touch with that experience. Put yourself in their shoes. I hope people will speak up to educate each other and to take responsibility so we can stand as allies with trans folks. I'm sure many of us would have loved more allies when we were faced with sexist, homophobic, or racist comments. The difference, MPD, is that being a lesbian isn't trying to take anything away from someone else. Being a person of a particular race is not trying to take away something from anyone else. So when gay people and people of color experience homophobia, racism, or sexism, those are in no way comparable to supposed transphobia. And supposed transphobia from lesbians, because lesbians are not being transphobic. We are being protective of our rights, our spaces, and our identities. So to compare sexism, racism, and homophobia as being the same as supposed transphobia from lesbians are in no way the same thing. Oh God, okay. Rebecca D. from Albi, France, or Albi, A-L-B-I, I'm not sure. Lesbian Connection has been a vital part of the lesbian community for over 40 years, and it's one of the last spaces we have left. In recent years, the radical trans movement has begun encroaching on lesbian and women's spaces, demanding our time, attention, money, and, most of all, validation. I sincerely hope this will not happen in the pages of LC. I ask that you not give in to this pressure and instead keep LC purely for lesbian women. We need you now more than ever, and we need to keep in touch with each other as much as possible. Thank you for your outstanding work and for being a space for true lesbian connection. Great letter, Rebecca. Next, we go on to Mary in California. I want to thank Anne McKinney for her thoughtful response to identifying as lesbians. When certain politicians who have always voted against the interest of women and the LGBTQ community pontificate on the supposed threat of trans people, whether in bathrooms, homeless shelters, or in sports, they claim they must act to protect women. Yet these same politicians repeatedly vote against reproductive rights, the ERA, the Equality Act, and the Violence Against Women Act, and they've never shown any support for Title IX. At the same time, some feminists support the anti-trans legislation these politicians put forward, and they even use the same talking points. These politicians are not our allies. They seek to divide marginalized groups in order to keep them marginalized. Trans rights are human rights. Lesbian rights are human rights. LGBTQ rights are human rights. Mary, girl. Women and girls do need to be protected from males in bathrooms, shelters, and sports. We have ample evidence of men calling themselves trans, whether that means they're genuinely transgender women or they're just men who call themselves trans. Either way, there's not much difference. We have examples of this, of men calling themselves trans, attacking women in bathrooms, in homeless shelters, in prisons, in sports. How many of us know countless stories of trans inmates raping female prisoners? How many of us know stories about trans males at women's shelters exposing themselves in the bathroom to to actual women? How many of us know stories of trans athletes breaking female sports records in the snap of a finger? Mary, your examples are pretty shitty when we can all come up with numerous examples of why those are bad, okay? Let's see. The same politicians repeatedly vote against reproductive rights, the ERA, the Equality Act. The Equality Act is in the United States, is not really... it's hard because I'm not even American, but I know all about this thing because you have to know everything about American politics, even though Americans know literally nothing about you or your country. But I digress. The Equality Act is good and bad. It's frustrating because it's 95% good and 5% going to give trans males every permission they've ever wanted or needed to be terrors. So what do you do, right? Again, we have our favorite buzzword, trans rights are human rights. Literally, no radical feminist, no radical lesbian feminist would ever suggest that trans people are not deserving of human rights. I've said it a million times in videos. Trans people deserve the right to liberty and happiness and freedom of choice, mental health care, medical health care, equal opportunity to education, housing, jobs. No one disagrees that trans people should have rights. Oh my God. Moving on, we've got Bev Joe from Oakland, California. Also a co-author of Dykes Loving Dykes with Linda Stryker. She writes, men are erasing lesbians and women on every level, from women's sports to political representation. The National Center for Lesbian Rights prioritizes trans over lesbians. No matter how many girls and women are raped and murdered each day, the media portrays trans women as the most victimized. Why are they more valued than we are? Please do not guilt trip, shame, or blame us for quote-unquote violence against transgender women. It's male-on-male violence, and some of those men are attacking and killing lesbians and other women, so please stop calling us ignorant and telling us to educate ourselves. You said we called ourselves lesbians because there was no other explanation for women attracted to women at the time. I remember queer from when I was little and later gay, but finding lesbian as a name of pride made all the difference. Identifying as lesbians rather than queers has saved many of our lives and helped us create and find an international community where we finally belonged. Lesbian feminism has strengthened us even more. As a lifelong butch, I know what it's like to be harassed and attacked, and I never for a moment wanted to be male, because it was males who made my life and the lives of the women I loved hell. Thank you, Bev. Good points. All good points. From Kath in Yorkshire, UK. I just received the latest LC and I am so happy to read the response from Anne McKinney. It fills me with hope to see more women, particularly lesbians, speaking out on trans rights. I too have felt like I needed to keep LC to myself. Sadly, I would never dream of passing it on to my queer friends, who include trans lesbians, due to its uncontested comments regarding trans folks. I believe that outdated and prejudiced views against trans and non-binary folks pose more of a threat to the future of lesbian identity than anything else. Think about young queer girls growing up today who see and accept that trans rights are human rights. If the loudest lesbian voices they hear are anti-trans, do you think they will be proud to come out as lesbians? Here's to more trans love, respect, and solidarity in LC and beyond. In a roundabout way, good old Kath here kind of proved our point for us, in that all young, quote-unquote, queer girls do see is trans bullshit. So radical feminists, radical lesbian feminists, being vocal, standing up for lesbian rights, and being visible is key to saving these young girls. So way to prove our point for us, Kath. The next one is by Ayla in Lethbridge, Alberta, Canada. She writes, LC is one of the only spaces we have left that is absolutely for, by, and about lesbians. Everything is being dominated by trans this, genderqueer that. No one would ever suggest that trans lives don't matter, but lesbians, that is, women-born women who exclusively love other women, do exist, and we have every right to express ourselves and maintain our spaces. We do not have to bow down to the demands of males, no matter how they want to identify. Yes, very good. Agreed. Again, what I just said not too long ago, no one would argue that trans lives don't matter or trans people don't deserve rights. Duh. Jane in Arlington, oh God, what is the abbreviation? MA, Massachusetts? I'm guessing, hoping, I don't know. Anyway, USA. My thanks to Anne McKinney, who wrote about lesbians standing up for trans rights. I was sitting at a table recently with some youth listening to transgender activist Alex Capitan, whom I invited to speak at my church. At one point, I said to one of the youth that, had I been in my teens or 20s now, I would probably identify as genderqueer. She said, so why don't you now? It's hard to undo our conditioning, isn't it? It's hard even when we know that's what it is. Butch has never really suited me, and genderqueer really is a better fit. So, genderqueer lesbian here saying that trans lives matter. How sad is this? And how, these people always tell on themselves, don't they? When she literally said, had I been in my teens or 20s, I probably would identify as genderqueer. Right, because that's prime time for these cults to snatch you up. And the misogyny of butch never suited me and genderqueer is a better fit. You don't have to be butch, just be gender nonconforming. That doesn't make you not a woman. You're still a woman. Oh, last up, we have me. Letter from Radical Ramblings, a lesbian and militant radical feminist YouTuber. I must say, I am appalled. I can think of no lesbian nor radical feminist who would ever suggest that trans lives don't matter. Duh. I am both a lesbian and a rather militant radical feminist, and I believe that trans people deserve dignity, protection from violence, and equal access to education, work, and housing. That said, I do not believe that biological males, quote-unquote trans women, have any right or entitlement to lesbian spaces, lesbian culture, lesbian events, or lesbian lives. We have seen pillars of our community be decimated by the capitulation to trans women's demands, and I am tired of it. Mishfest, for instance, ended because of tireless fights over trans issues. I actually don't think that's what I wrote. Okay. The Vancouver Women's Library was vandalized by trans activists, and they were not even an official women-only space. The Vancouver Rape Relief Shelter was stripped of a $30,000 grant because a male politician deemed them transphobic for only serving women. The talks and events put on by a women's place in the UK are constantly protested and disrupted by trans activists. Even universities are ruling that biological males who identify as women, whatever that means, can compete and destroy the records of female athletes. Lesbian cafes, bars, bookstores, clinics, and other spaces have been shut down and lost to history because of endless pressure to permit access to biological males. I pray we don't allow that to happen in Lesbian Connection, which is truly one of the only pillars of lesbian herstory and worldwide community we have left. That was my letter. I feel like some of this I didn't actually say, and it was edited or changed. I'm going into my email sent box to try to see what it is I did right. Hold on here. Sent. Okay, yeah, they definitely edited it down, I think. Where the heck is it? Okay, I found it. I found my actual letter. Yeah, they edited it for sure. I wrote to them, I believe that trans people deserve equal and non-discriminatory access to education, work, housing, safety from violence, and dignity. And they printed, I believe that trans people deserve dignity, protection from violence, and equal access to education, work, and housing. So it's similar, but it's not quite right. That sucks. Okay. Next paragraph is pretty good. Okay. They rearranged what I wrote. I wrote, the Vancouver Women's Library was attacked and vandalized by trans activists, and they were not even an official women-only space. The Vancouver Rape Relief Shelter was stripped of a $30,000 grant because a male politician, Morgan Oger, deemed them transphobic for their mandate of serving women only. Mishfest ended because of tireless fights against Camp Trans attacks. And they printed it in different order and removed some of what I said. They wrote, Mishfest, for instance, ended because of tireless fights over trans issues. And that's not what I wrote. I specifically named Camp Trans, so that's kind of annoying. Let's see. Yeah, they rearranged another bit of what I wrote. I wrote, lesbian cafes, bars, bookstores, clinics, and endless more spaces have been destroyed, shut down, and lost to history because of endless pressure to permit biological males access. And they instead wrote, lesbian cafes, bars, bookstores, clinics, and other spaces have been shut down and lost to history because of endless pressure to permit access to biological males. It's similar, but it's not quite what I said. And I think when you change what someone actually said, you change the entire meaning, which I don't appreciate at all. Here's another thing they changed. I wrote, I pray we don't see nor allow that to happen at Lesbian Connection. I encourage the publishers to be selective in what gets printed. Lesbian Connection is truly one of the last pillars of lesbian history and worldwide community we have left. Not only do I encourage and ask, I beg that Lesbian Connection doesn't cave into these pressures. And they printed, I pray we don't allow that to happen to Lesbian Connection, which is truly one of the only pillars of lesbian history and worldwide community we have left. So that is frustrating, right? That, obviously they printed the majority of what I said, but rearranging phrases or dropping words I chose to use or leaving things out altogether really does suck, and it does change the impact and the entirety of what I said. I understand they have to edit for space and that kind of thing, but that is a little bit frustrating for sure. So, yeah. I just wanted to share the responses because I did actively encourage you all to write into Lesbian Connection. I don't know if any of these letters are any of my listeners, but I wanted to share what ended up happening with that because I did put out a direct call to action and we saw some response to it. So this is hella long. I still encourage you to support Lesbian Connection and subscribe if you're a lesbian because, like I said, it is one of the last pillars we have left. So yeah, Happy New Year. Have a great day. Bye.